Hi everyone, so I've got a new version of TelemetryViewer, and like before I thought I would do another demo video showing the new features. So let's get right into it. If we look at this video stream, we can see the balancing robot that has been in a lot of my previous videos, and I've recently made two changes. The first change is I added this ESP32 CAM Wi-Fi camera module, and that was just for fun to add kind of a first-person view when I'm driving around. And the second change is this power meter. So it's a USB-C power meter, the kind of thing you'd use to test a smartphone charger or a laptop charger, which is actually what I bought it for. But I also thought it'd be kind of a neat little thing to show, why you might have multiple telemetry streams monitoring one device. So if we go back, we can kind of see here, this is the camera module on the robot, kind of a first-person view, and this is the smartphone camera just monitoring the living room area, I guess you could say. And so if I drive it around, you can kind of see the telemetry for everything. And we have, down here we have the battery voltage and the battery current, and then also the battery current as a time domain chart. So you can kind of take a look at everything if you like, see how it all interacts. Anyway, so there you kind of get the idea of how it works and why it might be beneficial. So the USB-C power meter I'm using is kind of meant to be a high resolution, high precision measuring device. So it only updates at about 2 Hertz, which is why it's not really ideal for this application where you might want to see, like the current draw, tens or hundreds of times per second. But, it's better than nothing. And that kind of leads me into the next feature that I've added, which is on the timeline chart. Or actually, okay, before I get into that, so with multiple connections, let me demonstrate how that works. I'll open up another copy of TelemetryViewer. Alright, so like before, you have your connection settings down here, and you can click Connect to define the data structure. And that all works the same. But if you click New Connection, you can add a another connection, and you can keep doing that as many times as you want. And every time you click Connect, it will then let you define the data structure accordingly, just like before. You can remove a connection by clicking the X. And let's go back. And so you can kind of see here that we have the various charts. So one thing to keep in mind is right now each chart can only show data sets from one connection. For example, you could not have like the battery voltage on the same plot as an accelerometer or gyro reading. I do plan to support that in the future, but for now, to keep it simple, each chart is limited to one connection. So for example, if I configure this chart by clicking on the gear, it'll list all of the data sets for COM4, which is my Bluetooth UART, which has the telemetry from the robot, and then COM5 is my USB-C power meter. And so if I have anything selected from COM4, it'll gray out COM5 because you can't have both on the same chart. So that's basically it for multiple connections. So as far as the timeline goes, I added a couple new features. Mainly, I added these controls down here. So you can click here to jump to the beginning of telemetry, which is right here. You can click here to jump to the end, which is back into live view. And it looks like the robot is bumping up against the camera tripod. Let's see if I can make it cooperate a little better. Alright, there we go. And so you can pause, and like before, you can use your scroll wheel to rewind or go forward, either way. You can also click here to play back and play forward. You can click here to play backward. And you can also adjust the speed of playback. So if I click multiple times, you can see there's a number 2, and I keep clicking all the way up to 8 times. It will let you either rewind or fast forward by up to 8 times speed. So same thing here. Anyway, you get the idea. So I'll go ahead and jump back to live view. The next thing is if you go to export, we now are able to export the video files to MKVs. And so before, it would generate this kind of proprietary file as well as an index file separately that could only be played back in TelemetryViewer, but I was able to write a very simple MKV file exporter and importer, and so now you can use them. So for example, I'll go ahead and do a test, give it a file name, and so right now it is exporting the data. Alright, so if I go to my desktop, so now we have the CSV data. This would be from COM4, which is the Bluetooth UART, all of this stuff here. This is COM5, which is from the USB-C power meter, and then we have the 2 video streams. So I can go ahead and play the video streams now, for example with VLC. And there you have it. What you can also do is, of course, like before, you can import these all into TelemetryViewer either by dragging and dropping or by clicking on import. I also added the ability to play back just a video in TelemetryViewer. So for example, if I just copy this one video, or I mean, if I just drag and drop this one video, it will import just that video, and of course none of the other telemetry because I didn't drag and drop that in there. But now it's kind of in this video player mode, and like before, you can kind of click and drag to scrub through the video, and of course you have your playback controls to rewind, fast forward, and so on. The main benefit of playing the video back in TelemetryViewer is you now get your timestamps. So down here it will show the accurate timestamp of that particular frame. So again, like if I click and drag, you can see that playing. Whereas if you were to play the video with VLC or the built-in Windows media player, it won't be able to show you the timestamps. But it will play back correctly, and it'll play back at the correct speed. As we saw earlier, I was able to receive telemetry from the USB-C power meter. Let's go ahead and take a look at that in a little more detail. So I moved it back to my laptop, which is what it was actually originally intended for. And let me go ahead and connect to it again. So I'll go to new connection here. It happens to be on COM5. And this particular power meter is the RD Tech TC66C. There's also the regular TC66. This video is not sponsored by them. I paid for it out of pocket. I found it very useful, so I added support in TelemetryViewer for it. In case you happen to have one of these, or if you plan to get one, the TC66 will let you send telemetry over USB, and the TC66C, which is this actual model, also has a Bluetooth module built in for wireless telemetry. However, unfortunately, it is not a simple Bluetooth UART, so I'm not able to receive telemetry over it. Let's go ahead and add some more charts. So we'll put the camera back, and I can add, let's say, time domain chart. Yeah, I have to connect. Yeah, so we'll connect. Time domain chart. Okay, so now we have the data sets coming from the power meter. So I can plot power, for example. You can also plot, obviously voltage, current, resistance doesn't really make sense in this particular situation, but it will do the math and give you the equivalent resistance. So capacity and energy for group 0 and group 1 is basically like if you were charging up a battery, like a power bank or a smartphone, or, well, I guess even this laptop. It can, accumulate the amount of charge that it put into the battery, and you can read it out that way. PCB temperature is just a little sensor built into the power meter. I have it configured for degrees Fahrenheit, but it can also do Celsius. And then it'll also measure the voltages on the data plus and data minus lines, which are about 0 in my case. So that kind of leads me to the next feature that I've added. If we add another chart, we now have a statistics chart. So you can go there, and let's say we wanted to take a look at those. So we can now plot the, or not plot, we can display the current values as well as some statistics for them. You can also use the statistics chart to only show the current values if you just want like a simple, like a numeric display. So you could do something like that if you just want to show a bunch of data on screen. So something that may not have been obvious before is when you export, it's now much faster. I was able to rework a lot of the code and make it multi-threaded, and it's about 3 times faster on my laptop. And I'm not sure if this is really going to be obvious, but I'll go ahead and try to demonstrate it. So if I start exporting by clicking Save, in this case there's not a lot of data, so it'll probably export very quickly. But if you have a lot of data and you want to cancel, and you made a mistake, this button will let you cancel. So for example, now it says cancel exporting, and I could click that. Of course, it was so fast that it doesn't really make sense in this situation, but you get the idea of how that could be helpful. If anyone's interested in getting the USB-C power meter, I'll put a link in the video description. So moving on to the other features that I've added, let's go ahead and remove some of these data sets or connections. The first thing is there used to be test mode, and I renamed that demo mode because it just makes it more obvious what it does. And if we connect to that, I can add a chart as usual. So low quality noise is what we always had before. It's just a very low quality noisy waveform that I have intentionally shaped in this particular way. But I've added some new waveforms, and that is because I've added support for triggering, which is the next major feature. So if we go to, for example, noisy sine wave, it's basically a frequency modulated sine wave with a little bit of noise. So you can kind of see how it looks there. We can zoom in more, and yeah, you can kind of see how the FM signal looks. But of course, if you've ever used a scope, you really want triggering because it makes it easier to view the signal. And so down here we have all of the trigger settings. So yeah, zoom in a little more. And of course we have a lot of data, so we don't really want to see the sample number. And there you go. So that's kind of one of the cases where you'd really want to have triggering support. And it works just like a scope. So disabled is no triggering. Auto is it will look for a trigger, and if it doesn't find it immediately, it will just show you the data that it has. Normal will only show you triggered data. And single is your like one-shot mode, and you can click it again to rearm it and capture another trigger. You can have the trigger only affect the this particular chart, or you can have it affect every chart. Right now the triggering is very simple, just rising edge, falling edge, or both. I do plan to add more in the future, by the way. The trigger channel is, of course, what you're going to trigger off of. You can trigger off of any channel. It doesn't have to be one that you're actually plotting. It can be one that is not visible. That's perfectly fine. Your trigger level can be adjusted here, or you can click and drag here. Trigger hysteresis is, obviously what it does. In this case, there's not a whole lot of noise, so that isn't terribly necessary, but yeah, you can use that if you need it. The pre-post ratio, I'm not sure if that's maybe the best name for it, but it's, basically where you want the trigger to be on screen. So you can click and drag here to move the trigger point, or you can click and drag here. Another frequently requested feature that I added was the ability to transmit to a UART. So, for example, let's add another connection. And so now if you're connected to a UART and you go to settings, all of the UARTs you're connected to will be listed down here, and you can send data. So you could do something like that, and if you click transmit, it will send it to the device. In this case, you can specify it as text, and you can have it automatically append a carriage return and line feed. If you want, you can have it automatically send the data periodically. So in this case, I could have it send it once per second. If I just click there, it will once per second send hello. And then uncheck that to stop transmitting. You can kind of, I guess you could say, bookmark the data by clicking save, and it'll put it right here. And then you can click here to send it, or you can click here to remove the bookmark. You can also specify the data as hex or binary, and it will convert between the the values. So here you have ASCII, A, B, C, CR, LF. So that's fairly simple, and in fact I can show you back with the power meter I forgot to show earlier. So when you're connected to the TC66 power meter, it has just a few options. So you can click rotate display, which will rotate the display depending on which way you have the USB-C connector installed. And you can also flip through the various menus on the power meter. Alright, there's several other new features, although they're relatively minor in comparison. So let me go ahead and import the robot data again. And click here to finish importing. So if we go to settings, before you could benchmark only one chart at a time, and now it will let you benchmark all of them. And again, this is really more for me and other software developers. If I'm making changes, trying to improve things, I want to verify if I'm actually improving it or making it worse. So typical users won't need to use that, but it's there if you're curious. Basically, every chart will show you the CPU time and GPU time, both for the current frame and the last 60 frames average. And then also it will tell you the total CPU and GPU time for the entire frame. And that is basically for all of the charts, as well as some kind of like bookkeeping work done in the background to manage everything. So these numbers will be larger than the sum of all of the chart numbers. Another change was with notifications. As you can see here, you can now choose to show or hide different categories of notifications, and you can change their color. And speaking of colors, I wrote a color picker that is much easier and simpler than the one that I was using before. So if you click on a color, it brings up this color picker where you can click on a color, or you can type in a hex color code. If you type in a hex color code, you can press enter to apply it, or escape to cancel. I'll go ahead and put that back to green. If you change the color of a data set, like by clicking on the data set and then clicking the color button here, it'll have these dots. So basically, if you hover over it, it will tell you what data sets currently use in that color. So right now, the red color is used by the accelerometer x-axis, and then group 0 and group 1 capacity. So that way you can intentionally make things different colors or the same color very easily. And if you use the binary mode, there's a few new changes that you might appreciate. So if I do, let's say, UDP in binary mode, so right now the sync word is optional, so it'll put it in by default, but you can click to remove it, and if you want you can put it back in. You can also specify the value, so it defaults to hex AA, but you can put whatever value you want. And let's say you define a data structure, and maybe we'll give it a checksum. I've added some example Java code to kind of give you an idea of how to transmit binary data to TelemetryViewer from software. So here we have, a simple example of how to do it in Java. So a few minor things I did was I tried to make things just a little bit more user-friendly. So, go away. So for example, now I have units in some of the text fields and stuff like that. Also, like for COM ports, it'll say baud, so it's very obvious, what that number means. And of course, you can type in a value, and you don't have to type in baud. You can just type in like 3200, press enter, and it will, it'll interpret it correctly. And the last change I made is something that is really more for myself and for software developers. But you might have noticed there's now a stress test mode. So I'll go ahead and run that, and then I'll explain it at the end. It's a little bit weird, so let's just take a look at it first. Alright, so that was kind of weird. Let me explain what we were looking at. Basically, I've done a lot of improvements to the telemetry processing part of the code. And before, you could maybe process a few tens of megabits, whereas now, even on a laptop like this, you can literally process several gigabits per second. So in this case, I was getting at about 5 gigabits per second, but that's because I have the screen recording stuff going on, and when I just have one monitor connected and I'm not doing a screen recording, I can get about 7 or 8 gigabits per second. Now, the graph looked a little bit funny, and the reason for that is normally when you acquire telemetry, it will keep the last million or two samples in memory, and the rest it will dump to a file on your disk so that you don't run out of memory very quickly. However, because this is a stress test mode and it is capturing lots and lots of data, it would literally write more than a gigabyte per second to disk. And unless you have a very high-end SSD or RAID array, most computers wouldn't be able to keep up. So in stress test mode, I have it just drop the old data. So it just deletes it and it's gone. For example, I can disable that. Alright, so you can see that I have a 980 Pro SSD, which is a fairly high-end but still consumer-level SSD, and it can actually keep up fairly well. But you'll see what I mean. So if you keep an eye here on the write speed, now if I try stress test mode, that's what I was talking about. You're going to need a very high-end SSD if you want to actually write it to disk. But now that I have it writing to disk, it does actually have all the data. So you can see here we have the correct looking waveform on screen. And basically all it does in stress test mode is there are 4 data sets, A, B, C, and D. And they just increment by 1 every sample. So you get this like sawtooth looking waveform. And it's just meant to be a very simple simulated waveform that doesn't require a lot of processing power to generate. You can play with this if you want. It's kind of fragile. It's meant really more for me to help benchmark things and test things, but you can try it out if you want to. Alright, so that basically sums up the new changes. I hope this video was interesting. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Like before, You can download the software here. I'll put a link in the video description. And if you found this software useful and would like to send a little money my way, that'd be much appreciated. There's a link here and also in the video description. And like before, don't worry, there's no nag screens. It's not going to bother you for money. All right, yeah, leave any questions or comments down below. And if you know anybody that would benefit from this video or software, please share a link with them.